order, please. It's 5:37 on January 18th, 2012. Jen, would you please take roll?
Mr. Moldaver?
Here.
Mr. Bullock?
Present.
Mr. Smith?
Here.
Ms. French? Ms. Lomas?
Here.
Ms. Weber?
Here.
Mr. McIntosh?
Here.
Mr. Jordan?
Here.
Thank you. And everyone has in their packet a copy of the minutes from last meeting in December. If you've had a chance to review them, are there any questions?
Move to accept the draft minutes as submitted.
I'll second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Aye. Thank you. Passes unanimously. Are there, item number 4, are there any adjustments to the agenda, Cameron?
No.
Any members of the public here would like to speak? All right. So moving on to item number 6, the committee member and staff communications.
Just two things, Mr. Chair. One is I did communicate with you and Ms. Weber about the chair and vice chair, which is the next item. I'll talk about that more in a bit. And then also with Ms. French and Mr. Moldaver regarding the Historic Landmarks Commission hearing on the Mason Street Bridge, which was today, just to notify them of the time and date of the hearing.
All right, thank you. So then we'll move on to the election of the chair and vice chair.
Mr. Chair, move to nominate the vice chair to be chair for 2012.
Okay. Normally our process for this committee is we do, at this time of year, we do a nomination of the vice chair, and the current vice chair is prepared to move into the chair position during the next meeting, during our February meeting. I did have a conversation with Mr. Bullock and Ms. Weber, and Ms. Weber indicated in that conversation that I think her preference might be to wait to move into the chair position. So I was going to turn it back to the chair and Ms. Weber to kind of talk that through with the committee and see how you would like to resolve it.
Mr. Chair, with your permission, perhaps I could withdraw my motion until that conversation has taken place.
Of course. So I would actually, unless there's someone that would like to volunteer for the vice chair position, I would move to have Betsy take that position again for the year 2012. Anyone would like to second that?
I'll second.
All right. All in favor?
Can we hear from the candidate? If I know she doesn't talk often on the record, but
I'd be happy to do that.
okay, great.
All right. Then all in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Passes unanimously. Okay. And then for the chair position?
I guess then I'd be happy to nominate Paul to continue as the chair for this year unless anyone else would like to step up.
Second.
All right. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye.
Okay. Thank you. Unanimous. Next item then would be the business items. Stormwater treatment retrofit project grant proposal. Tim?
Yes. Good evening. I'll be giving a presentation on the Proposition 84 Stormwater Grant Program and the proposed stormwater treatment retrofit project. Excuse me. Oh, my name is Timothy Burgess, Water Resources Specialist with the Creeks Division. Staff recommends that we apply for funding for this project through the Proposition 84 Stormwater Grant Program. To just give a little background, stormwater and urban runoff from impervious surfaces are major sources of surface water quality degradation. Runoff from parking lots often contains pollutants including hydrocarbons, fine sediments, polycyclic aromatic hydrocarbons, nutrients, bacteria, and additional pollutants that are toxic to aquatic organisms and potentially harmful to human health. Stormwater runoff is the most common cause of water pollution in the United States. Unlike pollution from industrial facilities, which comes from discrete sources, stormwater pollution is caused by the daily activities of people everywhere. Infiltrating stormwater into the soil is an important treatment method. This strategy is aimed at maintaining or restoring natural hydrologic functions at or near the source to achieve natural resource protection. In addition to improving water quality, infiltration at the source also helps recharge groundwater and reduce peak flood flows and rates. Just a couple of slides of parking lots during rain. The slide on the right, it's hard to tell, but there's a lot of oil on the surface of the runoff from that parking lot, and that's a common sight if you look at during a rainstorm. And so for the Stormwater Grant Program, the purpose of the Prop 84 program is to provide funds to the local public agencies for projects that reduce and prevent stormwater contamination of rivers, lakes, and streams. The minimum grant amount is $250,000 and the maximum grant amount is $3 million for each project. The grant guidelines require a 20% funding match from the applicant agency. And because of the multiple benefits of on-site stormwater infiltration, it's considered a superior best management practice strategy. And the Stormwater Grant Program guidelines promote the use of infiltration as a stormwater management strategy. And one type of tool in that strategy is permeable paving systems. And they're a really effective approach at achieving that. Permeable pavers were chosen as the preferred design for retrofitting existing paving areas with low-speed traffic for several reasons. Permeable pavers detain and filter polluted runoff through passive infiltration. The permeable paving designs will utilize permeable pavers to satisfy the city's stormwater management programs, requirement to capture and treat the volume of a 1-inch storm in 24 hours. They don't compromise the existing use of the facility or the surrounding structures, since the storage and infiltration takes place under the surface. And last of all, they don't use energy for operation. They don't really require very little maintenance beyond what's already done to these facilities, and they improve the aesthetics of the site. Just to go over what the city recently completed a permeable paver project in the parking lot at Mackenzie Park, which you all are familiar with. And early monitoring results have confirmed its effectiveness at capturing and treating the stormwater runoff. The pavers have captured all of the runoff from storm events up to this point. We haven't had that many storms, but all the storms that we've had, they've allowed it all to infiltrate into the soil below the pavers. Before the project was installed, this runoff would have flowed quickly to the storm drains, creeks, and the beach untreated. Another side benefit of this project is that it has reduced the potential for flooding in the parking lot. You can see the picture on the bottom of this slide, that big puddle. The storm drain at the main storm drain inlet of the parking lot used to get easily overwhelmed during storms with leaves and storm water, causing it to clog. And that large Mackenzie puddle was a common sight, and it drains slowly after storms or unless someone came out and unclogged it. Now, since much of the stormwater is captured by the pavers, the potential for flooding has been reduced. The Creeks Division is proposing to apply for grant monies to fund several stormwater treatment retrofit projects. We're going to package these into one project under the grant application. The first is the Oak Park parking lot near the Horseshoe Pits, and then nearby that is the Oak Park bandstand area. This is the picture on the left. It's small, but the parking pits are the bottom one. The upper left is the bandstand area. That's all asphalt paving. And then the Oak Park picnic area, which is across the creek by the barbecue pits, across that footbridge. Another project is the Louise Lowry Davis Center and Teen Center parking lot, which is a large parking lot downtown. And another one that we're looking at is the Franklin Center parking lot on the east side. That's a small parking lot, but it looks like a good fit for a permeable paver design. The total cost for the project is estimated to be $1.8 million. We're proposing to seek a $1.5 million grant, which would then be matched by $300,000 in local contribution. Measure B funds would be used to provide that 20% match, and the funds would come from the Creeks Division Capital Program line item identified for stormwater treatment retrofit projects. The concept grant proposals are due on January 31st. Proposals will be scored, and the highest-ranking applicants will be asked to submit a full proposal in March 2012. And so, last of all, I wanted to end this presentation with the video of the water truck that we had during the opening, the ribbon cutting for Mackenzie Park. It's a great visual on how these things work. Short. Very short, maybe. Let's see. Maybe it's just a JPEG. Well, in this video, it's the water truck is squirting out water full blast, and all of it is basically disappearing into the pavers, going underneath. And that's about it. And anybody have any questions?
Mr. Chair, I was so completely persuaded by Mr. Burgess's presentation, as well as the Mackenzie Park opening and the water truck demonstration, that I would like to move that the committee recommend that the application for the $1.5 million be submitted as presented in the staff report.
Thank you, Mr. Moldaver. Let me see if there's any other questions from any of the members before we move to that motion. Are there? Does anyone have any comments? Oh, Mr. Jordan, please.
Hey, I'd just like to share in that I was at a briefing yesterday with that other little water board function I serve, and Mackenzie Park was raised up as a example of exactly what should be happening in cities. And just to also let you know that what a wonderful thing it is here, as I've been told up and down the Central Coast, that we actually have a Measure B that allows us to start the funding process on there. There are other cities, some of them even larger than us, up the coast. There's only one Phase 1 city right now in the Central Coast section. There'll soon be two. But they're struggling with ways to get to these grant funds and even find ways to begin to attack things for their NPDES permits. And so when you're looking at this, just feel fortunate that you're in a town where you actually have a tax base that allows you to even move forward on these great projects.
Thank you. Good points. Yes. I do have one question, and it's minor, but although the 4 lots that you have chosen, are they actually in need of repair and replacement at the moment, or is this just something that would be down the line when they are in need of replacement?
None of the proposed lots are in need of repair, and none of them are listed on the 6-year capital program for replacement or repair.
I would just add to that that all of the lots are, none of the lots are new, and they're all in a regular maintenance cycle. None of them are scheduled for replacement at this time, but they are scheduled in a regular maintenance cycle, which for an asphalt parking lot is approximately every 5 years. They're re-slurry sealed, and then approximately every 30 years they are completely torn out and replaced. And so each of the 4 lots that were mentioned are at different phases in that 5-year maintenance cycle. Using the pavers obviates the need to do that kind of maintenance. These are concrete pavers, so that you don't need to go in and do that kind of maintenance. The maintenance for this type of application is essentially the cleanup maintenance that's done in the parking lot with a sweeper vacuum vehicle.
Thank you. Thank you. Any other further comments? Yeah.
How many sites did you consider before selecting these 4?
I don't know the exact number, but we had a long list. We started with every city-owned parking lot, and then we narrowed that down based on a lot of different factors: slopes and area, underground utilities, things like that. And we narrowed down to a short list of I think maybe 10, and then these really were the top candidates.
I would say the number was 2 to 3 dozen parking lots.
What was the criteria you used to rate these or pick these particular ones?
Well, really, we were looking for, this is a grant. This is something that we want to move forward on quickly if we get this grant funding, and we were looking for something that's going to be easy to do as far cost effective, and not a whole lot of utilities underground was a big important thing that could increase the cost on a project, and nothing very sloped. Also, we wanted to look at stuff that was going to be visible to the public, and even in different areas of the city. So those were a lot of the factors.
I would add the size of the parking lot, the slope of the parking lot, the visibility. These are demonstration projects, and one other very important consideration for an infiltration type project is the depth to groundwater. And so as you start to move closer to the beach, you start to have a higher and higher groundwater table. And so those present a challenge for this type of design.
So proximity to creeks was not something you looked at, or it was something you looked at?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily, because these, ultimately the water from all these parking lots just drops into a drain and just goes straight to the creek untreated. And so, as it turns out, we have one of the selected parking lots is at Oak Park, and it includes not only the parking lot, but a large paved area around the bandstand, and then on the other side of the creek, a large picnic area. So in that particular location, they're right at the top of bank on both sides of Mission Creek.
I also should say that one of the requirements for the grant funding is that the site not drain directly to the ocean. It has to drain to a river or a creek. And so that narrowed it down a bit too.
Thank you. So, Mr. Moldova, would you like to restate your motion?
I found that Mr. Burgess's presentation was so convincing that I moved that the committee recommend to the council that the staff go forward with the application described in the presentation for the $1.5 million capital grant.
Second that.
All in favor?
Aye.
All right, thank you. Thank you, Tim. Okay, thanks
Thank you.
very much. So the next item on the list is a presentation by George Thompson regarding the Upper Las Positas Creek Restoration and Stormwater Management Project. Thank you, George.
Thank you, Chair. Let me just take a minute to get the presentation up. Okay. Okay, good evening. My name is George Thompson. I'm the project planner for the Creeks Division, and this evening I'll be talking about a project that's actually already been constructed. And it's really in response to bringing back projects that have already been done and giving you an update on what the process was to construct them, what issues we dealt with, and then also where we are with the maintenance and other issues that we're dealing with. This project, for those of you that are unfamiliar with it, is located in the northwestern portion of town off of Las Positas Road. The majority of the project is on the municipal golf course, which is circled there in red, but a portion of it is also on the Adams Elementary School. Sorry. So the next slide is an aerial photo of the project site, but let me just put it in a little bit of context. The upper Las Positas Creek is within the Arroyo Burro watershed, and that's indicated, the Arroyo Burro is in blue, that dark line in blue. The Las Positas Creek watershed is outlined in yellow, and you can see right down here, there's a branch of Arroyo Burro Creek, which is Las Positas Creek, which goes up. It's channelized along this white portion for about 1,600 feet. It goes underneath 101 onto Earl Warren Showgrounds via pipes underground, and then onto the municipal golf course. A portion goes up to the east to Adams Elementary School, goes underneath Las Positas Road, and branches out into Samarkand neighborhood in, again, storm drain systems. The majority is above ground on Santa Barbara Golf Club, or the municipal golf course, and that's really where the big focus of this project was. We also have some residential areas. I mentioned Samarkand, but also northwest of the golf course, there's 2 neighborhoods that are impacted by Las Positas Creek. They either drain to Las Positas Creek or they receive runoff from the golf course. Now, this project was originally envisioned over 10 years ago by a county-wide effort. Project Clean Water looked across the county and tried to find sites that were good for stormwater treatment areas, and what we commonly refer to now as low-impact development. Not sure if that term was all that widespread back then, but that's kind of the goals that they were looking for, was LID, low-impact development projects. And the golf course project, Upper Las Positas Creek project, was identified as a prime candidate because it was public land. It's on a historic creek. It receives urban runoff and so forth. So the main goals: treat urban polluted runoff. We have a big opportunity to enhance wildlife habitat because it used to be a functioning creek. But we're also looking at other opportunities to decrease flooding, which has a lot of effects on water quality via soil erosion and unstable banks downstream. And since this is such a public project, we also had a great opportunity to maximize education. And since it was on and adjacent to a public golf course, we really needed to maintain course playability both through the project construction and afterward to the best of our ability. Let me give a short synopsis of what we were dealing with before the project was constructed. This is really the main portion of Las Positas Creek, or what was remaining of it. You can see the sandstone boulders, which are typical of our local creeks, but most of the native vegetation, in fact, in this photo, all of it had been converted to non-native invasive weeds. You can see the intensive turf management areas right next to the actual creek bed. And because the turf goes right up to the edge of the creek, we don't really have those buffer areas where nutrients can be filtered out or have wildlife vegetation buffers so that you can facilitate either breeding or migratory birds. This is on the Adams Elementary School, another arm of Las Positas Creek, which was subsequently converted at some time in the last 50 years to an asphalt channel. And so this received water from Samarkand neighborhood and then diverted it through this channel and then emptied out onto the golf course on the eastern border. Sorry. So one of the issues then with this asphalt channel is you really get those high velocities because there's no vegetation to slow down that stormwater, and downstream you get erosion. You've got this water blasting onto an unprotected earth channel, and so you really get these incised creek beds, which lead to other problems downstream, such as sediment washing down to Arroyo Burro Beach. And attached to that sediment is bacteria and other contaminants that are not necessarily good for water quality. Here's a different view showing further downstream, and basically you get the picture that there's not a lot of habitat value. There are conditions that are not good for water quality, and so the design really tried to find a hybrid where we're restoring habitat but also creating some sort of structure that you might not find in a natural creek, but more of a typical stormwater management project where we've got large basins, perhaps some mechanical controls where we can control the amount of runoff coming downstream and exiting the site. So the design phase really took about 2 years. It was spread out over about 3 years because it was done in 2 phases, a preliminary design and then a final design. And so construction didn't start until 2009. And it was originally scheduled for July through November of 2009, and construction started in July. We got some decent bids. We got a company that we had worked with before that's a local company experienced in this type of work. But in October 2009, we got a major storm, over 3.5 inches in 2 days. And Mr. Benson and I were both out on the site that day when it started raining and through the night. And basically what this storm revealed was a major design deficiency in the original design. And so we had a failure on 2 of the large berms on the project. We also had, we were heading towards the end of the construction project, so we had areas that were ready for landscape. Some areas had been planted. A lot of the erosion control material had been put down. But you really need a couple months of good growth and really need to finish up those last landscape elements before the project is complete. Well, this storm basically went through and eroded some of the channels that we had just constructed. Some of the bare hillsides were eroded. But we did have the large stormwater basins to capture a lot of that runoff. Nonetheless, that large storm perhaps was a blessing in disguise in that we were able to realize that the design was not adequate for the site conditions, and the actual engineering work probably wasn't quite as good as it could have been. And at that point, a redesign of certain elements, including the berms, some of the rock channels, and the rock weirs that I'll show you in a moment, were basically upgraded to a more sturdy design that was in line with some of the FEMA regulations that are out there that regulate some of the larger stormwater projects and dams in our state and nation. So basically what happened was October 2009, construction was supposed to wrap up in November. We did a redesign of a portion of the project, went back out to construction, continued to have several storms that winter, and construction was extended to May 2010. And the actual construction on a project like this involves a lot of grading. About 30,000 cubic yards of soil was moved. We're creating these large basins, but in addition to those large basins, we also have quite a few smaller basins that collect stormwater throughout the site. So it's a lot of moving soil. Some fine grading. It's very subtle, but there are quite a few small basins routed out here throughout the project. Erosion control fabric is laid down, a slightly different angle. This is looking east towards the Adams School up here. We've got that main channel that I talked about earlier. Excavate it, widen it out, lay back those slopes that are really erosive, lay down the erosion control fabric, and then bring in some native sandstone rock that you typically find in these creek channels, and then plant it. And this is in 2010, where we have a storm system moving through. We've got runoff coming through. We've got the willows planted. In this particular photo, there's a side channel here, and this is one of the key designs of this project, where we have these quote-unquote offline storage basins. So the main channel is here, but there's a flow diverter that diverts some of the lower flows into this offline holding basin. So it's both for stormwater quality, you get some still water here where sediment can drop out, but you also have some standing water for habitat, both for plants and birds after the storm has moved through. Here's another construction shot, laying in the rock and gravel to fill in some of those voids. The previous photo was taken basically where this operator is sitting, looking back up towards the hill. This is just turned around. So you can see the main channel here, and then down here is one of the larger basins of the project. And here it is full, about 2 million gallons of stormwater in this basin, and several tens of thousands of gallons in this basin, just to give you some scale. Now, the cost of the project, these costs reflect the the increased cost that was due to the storm damage as well as the redesign and the additional benefits that we saw from that design. But essentially, design phase was about $300,000. The construction phase was $2.47 million for a total price tag of $2.78 million. Now, if you want to break that down, after we started construction, we actually received several grants. This was before the storm event, early in the construction phase. So the total construction cost and total project cost is not what the city or Measure B has paid out. If you take the total cost, $2.78 million, and deduct the grant funding that we got, $1.67 million, we also reached an agreeable settlement with the design engineer and the contractor for over $650,000. So the actual Measure B expenditure is $428,000. Now, a much cheaper but really effective part of the project was the education and outreach, and this was a really big effort both by our Creek staff as well as the Adams School and some of the golf course staff and UCSB faculty. And one of the big efforts was creating a outdoor classroom, more or less, at Adams School where students could take advantage of an on-campus learning center in the form of a native plant garden and a bioswale. So over 2,000 students have participated in that portion of the project, and that has also included over 70 presentations, both given by their teachers and other educators. And it's really been a great success as far as the feedback that we've received from both the principal, the teachers, and the staff there, and the students. Of course, there are other opportunities for outreach and education, and none so more than the golfers that were actually on the site during construction and have enjoyed the site afterwards. And so that has been an ongoing effort to do outreach to them, and that's also including interpretive signage, which is going to be installed very soon. The wider community has participated in the project through tours and Creek Week events. City TV has done several documentary specials that have aired through the past several months. And then tours have been ongoing. And one of the things I'd really like to do is get people out to the course and the project when it's raining, because that's really when you see the project working. It's really an exciting time. So I've got my contact info at the end of this presentation for people perhaps out in the public that want to contact me for that opportunity. UCSB was also really good about being active in this project in terms of inviting us to do presentations on the project, worked with several of the faculty members in environmental studies in the Bren School on this project. They actually came out and also did a survey of the project viewers and golfers to gauge their reaction and benefits of the project, and that was important feedback. This is the Adams School portion of the project before the project was done. Here's that asphalt ditch. Behind the camera here is Samarkand neighborhood, and so you've got a storm pipe coming out across Las Positas Road. And basically what was done was the asphalt was removed, planted with the help of the students, and we've diverted the flows into a low flow over here, and then during large storms you get that main channel conveying most of the storm water. And here it is afterwards. I believe the students planted over 800 native plants along this stretch of the bioswale and native plant garden. So one of the main goals of the project was to restore plant and wildlife habitat. And during the course of the project, over 10,000 native plants were installed, and those were comprised of over 60 native species. And really one of the benefits of this project is it's not just wetland habitat, it's not just upland habitat, it's both of those things and everything in between. So we've got riparian and creek habitat, we've got bioswales, we've got wetlands, ponds, oak woodland, coastal sage scrub, grassland, basically the whole suite of habitats that were most likely present at that site before a lot of the development went in. So it's restoring a lot of those plants which create those resources for the birds and other animals that use it. So I noted these landscape buffers. In that earlier slide, I showed the pre-project condition having no buffer or gradient between intensively managed turf and those rock channels. And so a lot of these habitats basically create an area which shields the wildlife from the intense use activity next to the project, whether it be the schoolyard or golfers or residents nearby. It also creates a nutrient buffer between the fertilizers and other amendments that are used on the golf course and in Samarkand. Those can basically be filtered out before they reach the main flowing water. This is a typical shot over on the western portion of the project. Here's what I'm talking about, those buffers. Here's some intensively managed turf. You've got a large area between the turf and the wetland habitat. You've got water flowing downstream, but being able to pond into these areas, and so a lot of the sediment can drop out of the water column. You've got a whole different mix of sedges and rushes or wetland-type plants that are increasingly rare in this area. You've got upland coastal sage scrub and large grasses. You've got large riparian species over here, so it's really a mix in a relatively small area in this shot. Here it is during a storm, a different portion of the project. The storms are really flashy because the upstream areas are paved, or they've got roofs and sidewalks and other surfaces that don't allow water to percolate. So all of that water comes through this project really quickly, but a lot of it is held on the project to be able to percolate into the ground, which is what you see happening here. Here's another shot, a different area. This is the first year after the project was completed. And then here it is yesterday. You can see a lot of the vegetation is grown in. There's the old shot and then the new shot. So a lot of that stormwater really gets ponded back in this area, and you don't actually see the water surface because it's so grown in now on this smaller pond. Okay, so we've got the habitat and plant and wildlife aspect, but then we also have this more managed stormwater basin portion of the project. And there are two types of basins that are used on this project, detention and retention. Detention just holds the water for a short period of time. Retention is indefinite. So there's a way to hold the water in these large basins, whether it be with a valve that we can operate open and close depending on how much water we're getting to the project, or if there's going to be a big storm forecast, we can open it up slightly and drain that water out over the period of days or weeks in anticipation of more water. And so really the goal of doing all this manipulation is to reduce those peak storm flows. So if you imagine a large storm coming into Santa Barbara, dropping a lot of water in the neighborhood, it all runs off to the creek really quickly and then ends up down at the beach in a relatively short period of time. Well, that's historically not what has happened because a lot of those surfaces weren't paved, so it just simply percolated into the ground. Well, we're trying to replicate that, and in so doing, improve stormwater quality, and then side benefit is create wildlife habitat. In this photo here on the right, you see this plate with a handle, and there's an opening in here, and we actually have the ability to lift this out to increase the pipe size so that more stormwater flows out, or put in a different size plate with a smaller hole that allows this water to back up for a longer period of time. And here it is shortly after a large downfall. You can see the handle down here at the bottom of that head wall. And in a really large storm, this head wall would disappear underwater, and then over a matter of hours, that water would recede as it flows downstream. And just downstream is this large wildlife and stormwater retention basin. So this was the detention basin because it's only for a short period of time. And then here is the retention basin where over 2 million gallons of stormwater is being held for months on end, if not until the next winter. And so that first basin that we just looked at is further upstream here, and that catches some of that runoff from the neighborhood off of South Ontario there. Here's the other large stormwater basin on the eastern portion of the project. So in summary, these two large basins hold over 4 million gallons of stormwater. And based on our preliminary testing, the water that we're holding and storing for months on end is non-toxic, so when we release it downstream, it doesn't have adverse effects on wildlife. The nutrient concentrations have declined based on the water that's coming in and the water that we're measuring in these basins. So it's several different mechanisms. It's plants that are removing nitrogen and phosphorus and other nutrients that have bad effects on water quality downstream. And it's also sediment dropping out because some of those nutrients are attached or are made up of that sediment. And so because that water is so still, sediment is able to leave the water column and stay behind. And also, importantly, fecal indicator bacteria is below the recreation criteria for this project and throughout the state. So basically, we want to make sure that the water that we're releasing is not bad, but also that this project actually works. And all indications are, yes, it does work and improve water quality. This year we have, let me start by saying this is a project that requires maintenance, as do all of our projects. This year we budgeted $50,000, and as time goes on, we expect that funding should decrease because plants grow in, there's less space for weeds, essentially. And so the majority of the $50,000 is spent in the first couple of years on weed removal and remulching areas that need more mulch, irrigation repairs. Because we do have ponding water, we have mosquito issues, potential mosquito issues, and we've been able to deal with those by using a vector control known as BTI, which infects the larval stage of the mosquito and doesn't allow it to develop into a flying adult. We also use mosquito fish, which predate on larval mosquito. Another big effort this year on our maintenance is going to be doing infill planting in areas that are relatively bare or not looking as good as I would like. And then we also have mechanical and drainage systems on the project, so part of our job is to make sure that those valves and other mechanical apparatus are exercised during the year, are lubricated and ready to go for the next season, and then making sure that those pipes are clear and drop inlets are clear. So in summary, we've got about 8 acres of stormwater and wildlife habitat restored, 5 acres of wildlife habitat, 3 acres of stormwater management components, and we've got a robust education outreach program through both the elementary school, UCSB, the local community, and the folks that are playing golf right next to the project. And as I mentioned, our ongoing costs for this project will decrease over time as plants fill out and the project matures. I urge people to contact me with comments, questions, want to get a tour at any time of the year. Here's my contact info, and I'd be happy to answer any questions that all of you have. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Thompson. That was great. Would anyone like to make any comments or ask any questions?
Chair, I have a question.
Yes.
Mr. Thompson, can you tell us what your what the mosquito control program consists of? Are we doing that in-house or is that contracted out?
We're actually doing that in-house, and I actually do that. And so because I'm out there weekly, I do inspections of the standing water. But we also have, so let me give you a little bit more detail. When I go out, it's either is there mosquito larvae or is there not. And during certain times of the year when it's warmer, that's when you would expect to see more mosquito larvae. And so we do distribute the BTI, that biocontrol that I mentioned, during times when we do see mosquito larvae. The other thing that we have are those mosquito fish, and they work whether we're there or not. the drawback is they're voracious predators, so they're not very specific to mosquito larvae. They really go after whatever is there. So between the two, though, we've been really able to control any potential mosquito issues.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, for this presentation. It's excellent. It's really an incredible project that illustrates the power of what this Creeks division is trying to do and the benefits to the community. I encourage you to continue the outreach associated with it. I mean, it's an easily accessible project. It's a little haven in the middle of Santa Barbara that not everybody gets to. And the benefits to the school and the kids' involvement is really terrific of community engagement in this project. So I just really want to applaud everybody's efforts in this. Congratulations.
Thank you. Let me just say that there are a lot of people that worked on this project. I have the benefit of presenting it to the public, but there were countless people, the teachers at Adams School, the golf course staff, Creeks Division staff, public works staff, our funders. There have been dozens of people on this project, so I will extend your thanks to them.
George, I echo Leanne's compliments about the project. I've had a chance to walk the golf course, and it really is impressive. And it's also nice to see when you're standing on the golf course, you can understand how the runoff funnels there because of the way that the hill is carved out and you're standing in a valley. So it's very easy for anybody to understand what's happening, which is really nice. I wonder if, since you've been retaining the water on the project, if you've noticed any effects on the downstream ecosystem.
We actually haven't because, one, we haven't done a real comprehensive monitoring of the downstream habitats, but basically the pre-project condition, all of this water ended up down at Arroyo Burro more or less in a matter of minutes. And so there are some ponds down at the main branch of Arroyo Burro, but between the connection of Las Positas Creek and the top of the watershed, there are really not any good permanent water holes. And so this project is really aimed, big picture, to restore some of those areas, the concrete channel. If we can get the data to show that we can eventually restore that area, this project would go a long way towards doing that.
Also, do you have a sense of how deep the sediment is in the retention pond or either of the retention ponds, and at some point will you need to dredge it and take it out?
I don't expect that we do. I mean, the amount of sediment that we get on the project is not as much as you would see on the main branch of Arroyo Burro, but we have designed in some access points on the project that in the future, if we do need to get in there with a small excavator, we would be able to do that. But I would expect it now to be on the order of a foot or two. So, and one of those basins is almost 25 feet deep.
Thank you.
I'm impressed with the mitigation restoration of the water courses. It really does look good. You've got good success ratios for just within a year. Not all the projects have that kind of success ratio. I am concerned a little bit about the Gambusia. Did anybody look downstream to see if Gambusia was already found in Arroyo Burro Creek watershed before you introduced Gambusia? And you do realize that they will pretty much decimate any kind of tadpoles, like your Pacific tree frog tadpoles, because they're going to be recruited with this water.
Right. From my recollection, Gambusia were found in some of the surveys that we did in the estuary for Tidewater Gobi. And to tell you the truth, I didn't actually put the Gambusia in there. I showed up one day and they were there. I don't know if vector control came out and did it or somebody else did it, but they're there. They are effective at controlling mosquitoes. So, and for those of you that don't know Gambusia, they are synonymous with mosquito fish.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, George, for an interesting presentation. As someone who lives near there and walks by there periodically, I have two bits of anecdotal information to supplement what you've just shown the committee and the public. Number one, Mark Holmgren is one of the more highly respected field biologists on the South Coast. Was so impressed with the habitat restoration that he led a team in last year's Audubon Christmas bird count that just basically focused on the area around the golf course and came up with several very interesting finds that helped make Santa Barbara, I think, number 4 in the United States. And then also just stopping by the cafe occasionally and talking to the regular golfers. I know some of them, when they had that early snafu after the October rains, were concerned that this was going to turn out to be a sow's ear rather than a silk purse. But talking to them over the last 6 months and asking how the course plays and how it looks and how it feels and lost balls and stuff like that. And maybe Michael can add some observation. I know he's there periodically. But most of them have indicated that now that it's pretty much finished and they understand what's going on, it works really well as a golf course, as well as for cleaner creek and restored habitat. So as of right now, it looks like a win-win. So congratulations.
Okay, it's funny, we were just talking about that before the meeting, that I saw Chris Talarco Saturday night over a beverage and asked him what his reaction was too, and he said, it's the greatest thing that ever happened to the golf course, he just wished it had taken place in a week with a snap of a finger. So if they could have gone from where they were then to where they were now without the construction and the blowout of the construction and, you know, just the economic downturn in golf courses, that if they'd had that time period back, what a great facility it would have been. So I think overall, the feeling I get and the feeling the golf community has is a great foundation for the future, that when golf does come back, or if you're interested in golf, it's a much more attractive golf course than it was before, as well as functional. While I'm up, I had one question too. I was actually on Creeks Committee when this started, which seems like forever ago, and I remember the first consultant's presentation down in Gebhard, which was a young lady with an accent that made her a little difficult to listen to. And there were some numbers thrown about then, because as Cameron will remember, I always avoid the science of what's in the water and start to focus on how much water there is too, because nobody ever talks about volume. Everybody always wants to talk about what's in the water. But there were some numbers thrown around at that time on percentages on how we would help cut down on the actual volume that was going down further into the creek and causing the erosion. And I'm just wondering how that's turned out, and if we've realized, I can't recollect those numbers, but have we realized those numbers and seen the benefit to that also?
In short, from the past year or so, and obviously this year has not been a great rain year, so it's limited our data. But essentially, if you have a 2-inch storm, 100% of that is contained on site. And so for our area, a 2-inch storm is more than most of the storms that we get. Obviously, as the winter season progresses, and the basins fill up, we're going to have less volume unless we release some water. But that's kind of the short answer, is the volumes are there. And our ongoing monitoring research is showing that what's in the water is not getting downstream. So those pollutants are being held back and treated.
George, one more question. This is an incredible project. I think the result is outstanding. I've been on the golf course several times during construction and after, and I've been very, very pleased with what the Creeks Division has accomplished. But what all the other golfers talk about when I'm out there and observing the project together is, well, what's going on with Earl Warren Showgrounds right next door or right downstream? That's a state facility, correct? Are there any plans or any meetings or discussions happening with Earl Warren about what they might be able to do? You know, we know there are large animal shows there on a regular basis. The quality of water coming off of that property can't be great.
Well, I can't say that we've had extensive conversations on doing any kind of joint partnership on a project or looking at what they might do to convert their facility. Our effort has been focused on the other side of 101, where we're able to capture both Samarkand, Las Positas Municipal Golf Course, and the showground property, and looking at what types of projects might go in downstream, whether it be another detention, retention stormwater facility, whether it be decommissioning the concrete channel, if it's technically feasible. I do have a working relationship with the CEO of Earl Warren Showgrounds, and I know that they have taken some measures to protect their stormwater inlets with filters and those sorts of devices. But as far as a wholesale large project such as we've just completed, I haven't heard any plans to do that. And it is a little bit tricky with a different jurisdiction, particularly one at the state level.
Thank you.
Well, thank you, Mr. Thompson. I think that project turned out great. It looks fantastic.
Thank you.
And thank you for your presentation. The next item on our agenda is the Mason Street Bridge Replacement Project. And Leanne, you have a report from today's meeting?
Yes, thank you. I did attend the Historic Landmarks Commission meeting today when the Mason Street Bridge was presented, and they help me, it's facilities, right, that made the presentation? Public Works, thank you, excuse me. The Public Works Department presented some modified plans since the last time we've seen them, and they are moving in a favorable direction. So that's overall the good news. The bad news is that they're still saying there's no way to save the sycamore tree. So that's one that we're continuing to monitor. So the details on the good news is that they have reduced the width of the sidewalk on the south side of Mason Street, so that's narrowed the bridge somewhat. They are also, they've moved and narrowed significantly Kimberley Avenue, which is the street that comes down. It remains a two-way street, but it has gone from like 35 feet across down to 26 at the choke point there at the intersection. So that's really good news, and that has allowed Public Works, working with the Creeks Division, to increase the habitat areas on mostly the eastern side of the creek. Okay, so that's sort of what they presented, the high notes of that. And then through the discussion with the HLC, you've got a summary of the notes or the recommendations HLC is making back. But the key points here to look at is from our notes from December. I did ask about the rickrack at the base of those planted areas, and asked that they analyze that, and that was the number one recommendation that came back from the HLC, as they wanted to make sure that that gets in. So the HLC is really embracing our partnership and collaboration with them, so that's great news. There is some concern about what the walls are going to look like, so that's sort of HLC's jurisdiction. Some of the walls, to make the channel wider and our planting area, some of the walls are getting quite tall, so it's understandable that they're concerned about what they're going to look like. At one point, adjacent to the bridge, the walls themselves are 13 feet tall up from the creek bed. So that's where their concerns come in, and the integration with what's downstream is a part of that consideration. If we do lose the sycamore tree, the one root ball, the 5 trees, just so we're all on the same page, the Public Works is coming back and saying within this project area, there will be a minimum of 13 additional trees, replacement trees, plus the opportunity from a mitigation standpoint of planting more trees, more riparian trees further upstream, as is consistent with our desires, obviously. I should make a side note that the Urban Creeks Council also presented, and their key request was the shade issues that obviously the trees provide, and that will be a significant impact. And one of the recommendations that translated into from the HLC standpoint is they've asked Public Works to come back and show the shade parameters of the trees that will be planted, so that we can get a better idea, is that sufficient for protecting the creek. But I think the most important thing to highlight here overall is we continue to push back on the Public Works Division, asking that they consider how to narrow that bridge even further. And it's wonderful to see that the HLC is in partnership with us at really asking and thinking of creative ways in which to do that. The challenge, as you'll remember from previous presentations, is that once the Hotel California gets developed, that State Street and Mason Street intersection will be expanded. And so you go from a new intersection, wider boulevard and parking, within a block, you're practically on the Mason Street Bridge. And so the recommendation was for Public Works to look at what is in the federal laws, because we are getting federal funds for this, so to make sure that we really understand, is the width recommendation based on the width of the traffic area or the total width of the bridge gutter to gutter. So, that makes a difference. So that's part of it. But the other part is also looking at curb extensions that would help take the traffic off of State Street down Mission Street and narrow it in before you get to the bridge. So the bridge itself wouldn't be a choke point. It would be curb extensions that would slow traffic and narrow them down, so we could actually get to a bridge that's at a minimum width. Some of the other developments, I already mentioned narrowing the sidewalk, particularly on the south side, that gains us 6 feet. And on the east side of the creek, where we have planting already in the plans, they'll be able to extend that planting that additional 6 feet. So that when you look at square footage, that's a significant incremental addition. The other way that they're narrowing the bridge is the what do you call it? Not railings. Yeah, railings. They are called railings. They were originally specified to be 2 feet wide. So that was adding. So you had the 2 feet wide railing, then the 9 foot wide sidewalk. So now the railing itself is being specified as 1.5 feet. That's a gain, and the sidewalk's been reduced to 6 feet. So, like I said, they're moving in the right direction, and HLC with us is encouraging them. And I think the point that was really great is the Ortega Street Bridge was recently completed, and it is a wider road, and the bridge is significantly wider than the original bridge there. And the comment is, wow, is that still consistent with Santa Barbara neighborhoods to have that wide of a bridge, given some of our streets really don't have that kind of traffic. And I think Mason Street is really a perfect opportunity to look at. This is sort of the transition from the high traffic zone of State Street to our residential area. So maybe there is collectively some additional motivations for narrowing down that bridge. I mean, still obviously two-way traffic, all that stuff, but let's see what we can do to narrow it. So that's all moving in our direction, because the narrower we can make that bridge, obviously, the less impact there is on the creek overall. I've gone on a bit here, but I think that really covers the highlights of the discussion. There's a lot of support from the HLC to stay on this this development and to hold Public Works really accountable for responding to the design requests along the way. Did I miss anything? I think you watched what was going on.
Yes. Well, Mr. Chair, Ms. French, thank you for the discussion on that. And I want to thank you and Mr. Moldaver, who have volunteered and been appointed by the committee to go represent all of you. And I'm not sure when they signed up for that they realized that there was not just going to be one hearing, but so far there's been 3, and the Public Works Department received direction to go back on certain issues. I think they had 17 different comments to go back and continue working on it. So the hearing is continued indefinitely. There will be another hearing, and this did just, we've received a copy of the plans, the new proposed plans this morning, late this morning, and Ms. French was able to pick those up and still make it to the hearing this afternoon. And the hearing was only this afternoon. It ended, I think, at about 4 o'clock this afternoon, and then she's coming over here to report out on it. So there is just 2 points of clarification that I wanted to make, and I'm not even positive that I understood exactly what's going on, because this really has happened fast, and it was today. And those are, I think that Ms. French was right in saying that Kimberly was narrowed somewhat, but I think all of the narrowing, as I understood it, came off of the adjacent private property, not away from the creek. So the line next to the creek stayed the same. It just pulled off of that property, which was one of the objectives that Public Works had as well. And some of the concern expressed, I think, by HLC members regarding the height of the vertical concrete walls on the side of the creek was specifically directed, I think you all have a copy of the plans in front of you, specifically directed to the wall on the upstream side of the bridge, on the eastern side of the bridge near Kimberly. And it was, I think, a 14-foot high vertical wall there, and it kind of tapered off as it moved upstream. So that section of on both sides of the upstream, both sides of the creek upstream of the bridge are now proposed to be vertical concrete walls. On the downstream side, the western bank is a vertical concrete wall, and then there's that small, it's about 3,500 or 3,600 square feet habitat expansion zone area that will be really the only area that is not vertical concrete. So the HLC was really supporting the idea of going back and looking at possibilities to restore a sloped bank on the upstream side of the bridge as well as the downstream side. But I think going forward, and the committee can have some discussion, I was just going to make a recommendation going forward in that, as Ms. French mentioned, there has been some movement in the design, the sidewalks. I have one other clarification. The downstream sidewalk was narrowed to 6 feet wide. The upstream sidewalk is 8.5 feet wide. And I think the reason, as I understand that from Public Works, was because of line of sight issues for cars coming out and pulling off of Kimberly. So with those clarifications, I was looking through. I actually didn't get all 17 of the different directional comments that came. I was trying to write as fast as I could as the chair of the HLC was making his recommendations, but I definitely got the ones that really pertain to the jurisdiction of this committee, and so I just wanted to. I handed those out to you. It's the ones that are under the HLC with today's date, and I think that something that would be the most useful for the HLC and also for the Public Works engineering staff is to kind of take a look at these and see if there's see if the committee supports the direction the HLC has given and whether there's any elaboration as to those. But as we kind of continue to kind of focus our comments. It seems to me that the comments that this committee has put forward and the concerns of this committee are being reflected by HLC. I just think it will be easier for the Public Works Department if we can kind of stay on the same page with them going forward. So, having said that, the places where I think there's overlap between this committee's jurisdiction and the direction given by HLC are in the first comment, which reflects a comment by this committee regarding consideration of impacts to the Tidewater Goby from the riprap at the base of the habitat expansion zone. Number 3, one of the things the HLC did agree to today that's not clearly spelled out here is it sounded as though were a majority of members of the HLC who were, although they wanted to preserve the sycamore tree in place, there was, I think, a feeling among a majority of the committee members that Public Works had really explored that option and that they were convinced it wasn't going to be able to be preserved. So they're sort of resigned to losing that tree. But in response to that, they did make another number of suggestions. One was with the mitigation trees that are planted, they wanted significantly sized trees to go in so that they had a fair start and an ability to start shading the tree soon, or shading the creek soon. Number 5 on the list was also discussion of mitigation. That this would actually be mitigation for the removal of the sycamore tree. Number 6 on the list is that the width of the bridge should be reduced from the currently proposed design. They specifically said that 36 feet was too wide for the roadway in that area, and that the applicant shall investigate exceptions to the grant standard from the federal grant for the bridge, as Ms. French described. Number 9 on the list was to remove the abandoned storm drain, and if you remember, on the eastern bank on the upstream side of the bridge, there's a large storm drain that now under the existing condition comes out just downstream of the bridge. Is now proposed to come out just upstream of the bridge, but out of a vertical wall. This committee had recommended moving that outfall about 150 feet upstream and then removing that abandoned storm drain pipe so that you could slope the bank. And there was a request by the HLC to remove that abandoned storm drain. They asked to show the mitigation trees, the specific location of the proposed mitigation trees on the plans. And as Ms. French mentioned, show the areas that would be shaded by those trees on the plans. They asked, there was a request from HLC to study the ability for wildlife movement or wildlife corridor or migration underneath the bridge from the downstream to the upstream side of the bridge. And then with 2 more. One is number 14. With regard to the bridge railing, there was some general support. If you look at the last page of the handout, there was general support from HLC members for what's shown as alternate 2 at the bottom of the last page. I would just remind the committee, one of the early comments from the committee was with regard to those openings on the bridge railing to consider whether the openings could be made small enough so that your typical size trash that we find in the creek areas, such as aluminum cans or plastic bottles, doesn't fit through those holes because people place them in there and they get kicked through or they get blown through, and it may help prevent some of the trash from getting into the creek to narrow those openings. And then lastly, the HLC requested that Public Works study reducing the sidewalk on the north side of the Mason Street Bridge further than the 8.5-foot width, and also on the eastern side of Kimberly Avenue, which had a 9-foot wide sidewalk. And so, again, I think that if the committee can kind of look at those and either comment on those or express support for those, that might be the easiest way for this project to move forward.
Mr. Chair. As I understand it from the conclusion of Ms. French's report, this is indefinitely continued. So would it be possible if you and the chair work together to put this item back at our next month's meeting where perhaps we can have some suggestions to refine our list? That would be number one. Number two, I want to express my public appreciation for what a stellar advocate Ms. French has been working with the Historic Landmarks Commission. And I also want to thank Mr. Thompson and Mr. Benson for numerous meetings before the application and since our original presentation, working with John Owasiak and Pat Kelly and the team that's responsible for the street and bridge design, because this kind of movement doesn't always happen, and I think it's by having good specific suggestions and diplomatic advocacy in the public process that we've made some progress here. So thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Moldaver. With regard to your first question about putting off a discussion or decision until our next meeting, I'm not positive. I believe the HLC meets either weekly or every other week, and so they have not scheduled the next meeting. I don't know how long it will take for Public Works to get back on the agenda. It could be after our next meeting, or it may be before the next meeting. So it's up to the committee.
So would you prefer that we email our top priorities to the chair or to the staff so that they can be compiled? And would that be a serial Brown Act violation?
I think my preference would be for the committee to decide where there's a majority of support for a specific comment to make sure that the liaison's comments are reflecting the committee's position rather than individual members.
I have a question for staff. Is because I wasn't at the December meeting and I was reading the notes from the collective and trying to represent the collective's perspective. Help me understand if they remove the abandoned storm pipe, what advantage does that give us? I mean, does that really get us much further on the bank? Because they weren't sure that there would be a benefit to removing it.
Right, that's a good question. It depends where the outfall is of the storm drain pipe. So one of the committee's suggestion was to move the storm drain pipe outfall further upstream. And if that outfall is moved upstream, then you have that 150 feet just upstream on the eastern bank where you would have a pipe that exists today, but it wouldn't be being used. If you remove that abandoned pipe, then you have an opportunity to potentially slope that bank downward. If the if the final design includes an outfall that goes all the way to the bridge, and the only abandoned pipe is underneath the road, then there's really no benefit to the creek of removing that pipe. Does that make sense? Okay.
Mr. Chair and committee members, I'd just love to congratulate you guys that both Leanne and Lee were actively engaged with HLC and Public Works on this. Years ago, we talked about it, and we used the words liaisons, and that scared a lot of people in the power structure of an advisory committee having liaisons. But I'd also like to remind you that there's more than one opportunity to have input on this project. And while I appreciate what you're doing now, as the liaison to Planning Commission, this is eventually also going to come to the Planning Commission for a coastal development permit, at least, if not anything more. And that's a broad set of considerations that includes what Leanne even mentioned earlier, which was like neighborhood considerations and compatibility. And I can tell you, without without fail, generally, if I'm not paying attention to what's going on here, I will certainly see the minutes from HLC, but I'll probably see one line in a staff report that's really thick that says staff engaged the Creeks Advisory Committee. But there won't be a description of what took place back and forth between the Creeks Advisory Committee and Public Works, the Creeks Advisory Committee, and HLC. And I'd encourage you to just use the lines of communication to myself or other planning commissioners, and I think I'll put this on Cameron's shoulders a little to define it a little more. But certainly, if you have key issues and priorities that you're going to ask HLC to consider, it's also just as reasonable to put those down on paper and ask that staff send the committee's views and opinions and big vision also to the Planning Commission. And I think that then gets it right up front when those considerations take place, and it doesn't leave it laying in the middle of a staff report somewhere where it gets overlooked.
I have a few questions for staff about the significant size trees, and I'm all for planting the largest trees possible. Well, this isn't as much of a question. Just so you know that success of an individual tree when it's planted is higher when it's a smaller tree. So the larger the tree, the less success you're going to get on having that reach full capacity. And then I do have a question too.
I'll just respond to that by saying I think that I think that is the testimony that was provided by the landscape architect that's working with Public Works on the project, and I think he really recommended no larger than 15-gallon on the sycamore trees. And they're actually, I think, as I understand it, construction of this project they're looking at summer of 2014, and so they're actually looking at trying to propagate some saplings from the existing sycamore tree on site and to start growing those now. So they'll be a couple of years old by the time they go in, and depending on how long the bridge construction actually takes. So that's the current plan.
That would be helpful. And the question I have is on the section elevation 1 that shows Kimberly. This could be a typo. It says top of East Gabion Wall. Just if it is indeed a Gabion Wall, which is a basket filled with rocks, that would not be permitted by any of the permitting agencies since this is a steelhead creek, and gabions entrap wildlife, not just fish, but snakes, lizards, all sorts of other species. So if this is a typo, it's great, but if it's actually a Gabion Wall, it will not be permitted. So you may want to check that.
Again, I haven't had a lot of time to go over this with the Public Works staff, and especially these detail, but my understanding is that is indicating an existing gabion wall that's in that section of the creek. And my understanding further is that this is showing a location that is further upstream from that vertical wall, and is actually going to be a temporary situation until such time as that reach of the flood control project is built. And then this whole, or most of this area is going to be taken out and be replaced with a vertical wall.
I don't remember seeing an actual Gabion Wall there. If you're telling me it is, it's there. I'll have to look at it, see how bad it is. But even as a temporary wall, we would. I don't think NOAA Fisheries, the Corps, Fish and Game would allow gabions to be used. In fact,
I'll pass
agencies are trying to remove
pass that
them.
comment along.
So you just may, like I said, it could be a typo too, or just a misnomer. And the tree replacement ratio for most of the permitting agency for that sycamore would be 10-1. So you would have to find room for 10 trees for that one sycamore. And that's all I have. Thank you.
Question on Natasha's last point, 10 trees over what space or area?
Well, the replacement ratio for trees is for individual trees. If you take down one tree, you have to replace 10. The area for mitigation is based on the area that is impacted. So there's two types of way of measuring mitigation. But for trees, it's individuals.
And just for the record, I think Public Works continues to refer to the sycamore tree, even though it's in essence 5 trees out of one root ball. So just point of note.
That's 5 separate trunks. 5 trees. It depends on the situation. Depends how close the trunks are. If it is indeed the same root ball, there may be some adjustments, but you'd have to actually dig down. Most agencies count individual trunks as individual trees. That's the standard.
I just have a quick question. What is the spacing on the alternate 2 that HLC recommended? What is the spacing on those? Or do we know any of those?
I don't think it shows a dimension on this particular detail. It looks similar. Well, I was out at the Ortega Street Bridge project, which is alternate 1. It looks similar to that size. I would say that those are at least 4 inches. I think there's some standard that you can't go larger than, I think, because of kids' heads getting stuck in there or something like that, falling through. But I guess it's about 4 inches.
On that last point, how high is the rail? Do you know, in either alternative?
Don't know. Again, it doesn't show a dimension.
I know we had, as a committee, recommended that the railings be low enough such that you could peer over the creek or over the rail and see the creek, so that.
I think they're approximately 4 feet high.
Okay. If that's the case and they're 18 inches wide, then what's to prevent someone from just setting a piece of trash on the top and it being just as easily knocked over than someone stowing it in the width of the space? That being said, because if we want to fight other things, it may be better to make other recommendations where there may be more of an impact, whereas if the trash is just going to get knocked in anyway because of the height of the rail, then there may not be a difference.
That's absolutely right. There's nothing to prevent that, and it happens all the time. It's just a matter of trying to limit the access points, and what we see on the lower ones is the trash that blows out of trash cans and is just blowing around in the street, which sounds kind of strange, but happens all the time. And that trash may or may not blow through the it may stay low, it may blow up and over the railing, but it's just trying to prevent or limit the points where you get more trash and debris getting into the creek.
And then if I may, the one thing, if we're going to concentrate on points that we want to echo from the HLC, the one thing that's really stuck out to me is the 13-foot wall on the northern portion of the creek, because I had thought when we talked about it earlier that there would be a sloped bank on the northern side also, and that was one of our priorities, so it would be something to recommend. I don't know if we are going to put something in writing and circulate it, and as Michael suggested, submit it to some of the city agencies or if we want to make a decision now. But the height of the wall would be something that I would want to echo, that the HLC told Public Works to go back and revisit.
Yeah, I would agree with that. And I think we're on the agenda. We're here for discussion, and I think we should discuss what happened at the HLC and how our views match with what they're doing. And so I agree with what you're saying. And maybe at another meeting we can have it on the agenda that we'll actually have some action item. One of the points I made last time was about the wall that's going to be over the bridge and how I don't want it too high, too thick, et cetera, et cetera. And although this is an attractive wall, who wants to look at a wall? It's nice to go by and actually see the water and the ducks floating in it. And with this wall that they're considering, I think you're not really going to appreciate that there's a creek. And with all the plantings that we're doing on the slope bank, there's not really much point because we may or may not be able to see those because there's going to be a wall in the way. And I think that might be another item that we might want to talk about or recommend to the HLC. And are there any other discussion points anyone wants to talk about? No?
Just as a point of clarification, the wall on this north side, I think Cameron reiterated this, it's 13 feet or 12 and a half feet right here at the point where it meets the bridge and then rapidly goes down to nothing. So I just didn't want to leave the impression that it was 13 feet across the entire way. So it's a slope. I was a bit deceived by this diagram because it looks like there's plantings all along, and you don't really get a sense of the dimension of it and how much habitat there is there. I mean, at the point there at the corner of the bridge, it's not really habitat for the creek because it's up so high.
Are you sure that it diminishes so greatly? Because given these three schematics labeled sections 1, 2, and 3, and if you match them up to the map where it says sections 1, 2, and 3 in the northern portion of the creek, if we just look at the wall heights, you're right that section 3, which is closest to Mason Street, shows vertical wall 13.5 feet, but then in section 2, where it says vertical wall, it still says 11.5 feet, plus or minus. And then moving up to section 1, it still shows the Gabion wall as being 12.1 feet high. So am I to understand that it looks like the wall would at least be 11.5 feet high through sections 3 to 1 as we move up the creek?
I don't know. I don't know the answer to that, but it does look like the wall tapers down somewhat, but it's clearly you can see just looking at the length of the wall, it's longer than the width of the bridge, including the sidewalks and the railings. So the roadway on the bridge is 36 feet. The sidewalks one is 6 feet, one's 8.5 feet, and then you have 3 feet of railings. So that's 60-something feet. The bridge width would be 60-something feet, and it looks like it's a little longer than that moving up the creek. So,
Yeah, because I don't think it's down to 0 until you get to the section 1 where it starts to bend out.
Does Public Works present any sort of three-dimensional schematic when they present these plans, or no?
I think what you have here is what HLC was provided with today.
They just presented it as a fait accompli that the, what do you call this, the storm drain wouldn't move. And so I don't really know what's around those issues. It was not discussed in any great detail of what the barrier would be to move it. So I don't know if that's a possibility or not. I don't understand what the constraints are around that, so I can't report out. But these are some of the things I think would be helpful for us to be able to have a one-on-one, not a one-on-one, to have the Public Works come and present to us again so we could get to the heart of some of these points.
So I think it would be really useful at this point if we were to request a copy of the HLC minutes from their meeting today so that we can actually see what was put down, and then we can discuss it amongst ourselves at the next meeting, and maybe then come up with some action items that we'd like to see put into the plans. Yep. And if there's no more comments or ideas or criticisms, then I would like to say let's adjourn this meeting.